I came sick. I never got angry though. That's the interesting thing. Through all those times and losses and possibly losing my other son, I praise be to God. I'm telling you, somebody
Hey,
said to me, "It's okay to be angry at
sister,
God,"
sister,
and
sister.
Go ahead, Dave. Go ahead.
that it is okay. If somebody said to me, "It's okay to be angry at God," and I says no, and I was never angry. I through my turmoil and sinking, I still had a sense of peace. Can't explain it because,
I get it.
yeah.
I get it. I get it. I get it completely. Sister Mariah, go ahead. Mariah and then Candy.
Yeah, something that I thought was interesting here is that Job has given us a timeline finally. We know that this, from the time that he had his children and has lost them to this point in the chapter, it has been months that
Right.
has
Oh,
passed.
yeah.
And so I think that that's fascinating
That's a good observation.
because
Yeah.
yeah, because we all have been saying we don't know how long this has been and this been going on. All we can estimate is the 7 days that his friends came and sat in silence with him.
Right.
So I think
Good.
that is good.
Good point. Excellent point. Excellent point there.
Yeah. So
Uh,
I also take the. Can you stop screaming and wait? Sorry. Um, but I think that it's not as like he says that when God preserved me. I don't think that he doesn't think that God is not still preserving him, but I think
right.
that what he can be referring to is that hedge of protection that was around. He knows that God was preserving not only him, but the things outside of him that would belong to him.
Amen. You're right, sister. And I'll tell you something else. I think that what Job doesn't realize now, but he will realize later, is that the very thing that he's going through is the means through which he is being preserved. He just doesn't know it yet. He just doesn't know it yet. And so, and it just goes to show you that a man of such caliber as Job still has things that he can learn. There's still room for him to grow. And that's what I think Job is going to, we know he's going to learn that. He's going to learn that. You're right. God has never stopped preserving him. Job may wonder about what's going on, but from a human perspective, it's understandable. It's understandable. And so, and what we're seeing here is something that is very, very human. Very human.
Amen. Can I say one more thing, brother?
Yep.
Um, when he says that when by his light I walk through darkness, I think that he's kind of realizing that the protection and the covering that God had him in his light shined on him.
Mm-hmm.
He was unable to see that all this affliction was possible, that he was clearly walking through this darkness. And when that light was dimmed, then he realized the darkness and the possibilities of all the affliction that
Right.
was possible. So I don't see it as if he thinks, as like we were just previously talking about, as if he's just totally taken it away. I think that he's realizing, like many of us do, when we reflect back and we say, wow, God really had his hand on me, and then in this certain time or place or whatever, and then when we go through sufferings and afflictions, we think that, oh, this light has been dimmed. That's how I'm
Right.
viewing it.
Yeah. No, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I think that it's not uncommon for the believer to when they because I mean, I have certainly had in my lifetime times where I felt that the Lord, it's a paradox. It's like you believe on one hand, you feel that God has abandoned you or left you out there to kind of dangle, and at the same time you understand that He would never do that. And so you have this complexity that is going now. Like Brother Kaz says, you cry out and you're perplexed. That's what it is. And I think that's what Job is going. he remember, he's not an angel. He's a man who is living by faith. It's very difficult when you go through these trials to understand that, you know, and it will be easy for us to read these things and go like, oh, I would have done different. Would you? Would you really? And so I think that Job is like, he's having a very real response to a situation that has been compounded in from every angle. He's like his wife, like somebody mentioned earlier, his brother Tawab, his wife, his businesses, the people that work for him, his friends here, his personal affliction. He's wondering, God, where did you go? I know you didn't. I know you would never leave me, but I'm not getting the warm fuzzies, and I want that back. I want that back. But Job, we know from the testimony of the Lord himself that Job never charged him falsely. Never. He never did. And so so we have to understand that there is a lesson here for us to also understand about God, which is that even when we are in the worst of trials and tribulation, our God, he never leaves us. And we are not to mistake, we have no grounds to mistake his silence for isolation. We're never to understand his apparent absence for forsaking us. We know he will never forsake us. We know that. And I think certainly, I think Job knew that as well. I think he really knew that. But we also know that when these trials hit, they hit so hard. They hit so hard that it makes us start to second guess where we really are and what our standing is. Sister Candy and then Jeffrey.
Yeah, man, there's a lot about what everybody said and what you're saying. And at first, it's like when you first read it, you only hit certain pieces, and most of it was more or less about the lot. And it's that candle that's lit, and it's like for me, Job was like, he feels like it's gone out. You know, like the lamp is gone out in the darkness.
Excellent.
There is no light anymore. He knows God's still there, but he doesn't know where he's at because he's not communicating with him. Like it just feels so dark.
I love that. Love it. Love it. Go ahead, sister. I like what you're saying. Go ahead.
Well, you made me lose my track of thought. But it's like, you know,
Yeah.
he knows the Lord is his salvation. So he says, you know, and I reflected back on, I think, chapter 13, 11 for verse 2, when he says, as in the days, no, on verse 1, 13, 11, verse 2, where he says, and 13, 11 says, will not his majesty terrify you and the dread of him fall on you? So, and then, you know, that's like, he's watching over us. Well, then you go to Jeremiah 31:28, and he says, as I have watched over them, this is God speaking, or the Lord, as I have watched over them to pluck up, to break down, to overthrow, to destroy, and to bring disaster, so I will watch over them to build and to plant, declares the Lord. And verse 24 and 6 says something else to that extent. He says, for I will set my eyes on them for good, and I will bring them again to this land, and I will build them up and not overthrow them, and I will plant them and not pluck them up.
Amen.
And then when I go to verse 3 with the light, again, it just makes me know the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is his defense and my life. So whom shall I dread? Not these guys, you know, not nothing that's happened to me. And of course, you know, the word is the lamp to my feet and the light to my path. This is why he's kind of reflecting back before as well, you know, when things were all good. And then in Proverbs 6:23 says, for the commandment is a lamp, and the teaching is light, and reproofs for discipline are the way of life. So I think he also understands that part about what could be happening too. He doesn't know why, you know. It's like why does it feel so dark? And I like when you said, you know, he went back and reflected, reminiscing on when it was good. When then that's kind of what I was saying with the word and the light to his feet and his path and the discipline and the reproofs and stuff when it was good. But
Hold
now
on.
it's like he just put the candle out. Like, what's happened? What did I do for that light to be gone? You know, and then
Hey, Candy, can I ask you
No, brother, hold on for a
I
second,
just
brother
want to
Tawad.
ask her a simple question. Where's she from? Because her accent is so close to where I'm at.
Well, she can tell you in a second, but I want to keep the conversation going. Okay? Do you mind? Is that okay?
he'll be all right till I get done. In
All
verse
right.
4, when he says, I was in the prime of my days, when the friendship of God was over my tent. I went to Psalms 25:14. The secret of the Lord is for those who fear him, and he will make known his covenant. And in chapter 18 of Job, verse 6, he says, the light is in his tent is darkened, and his lamp goes out above him.
Right. I
And
mean,
then
I
11,
think that
17.
I think what you're saying. I get the point. I think we get the point, and that is that this whole idea, which I think you hit on perfectly, was about this candle, this light that God has always provided Job. Now, in Job's mind, seems to be put out, and now he's groping in the darkness, trying to find his way. And I think that's a really good, you know, I think what you've been pointing out really shows that, and I agree with it. I think that's exactly what's happening. Job is not seeing that he doesn't feel that he's benefiting from God's light anymore, and so he's just groping, trying to figure out where do I go, where do I go, and like they is saying, the light is always there. But I think that Job is when, like I said, when you go through something like this, it's hard to imagine. Like when Dave was talking about the loss of her children, it's like how difficult is it to reflect on the light of life when you are surrounded by so much gloom and darkness, especially when it involves death, and especially when it involves the loss of a child. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah. And where do you see the light in that type of darkness, you know?
Right, it's very difficult. It's very difficult.
Right.
So I get what you're saying. I think you made a very solid point. Very solid point. Brother Jeffrey, go ahead.
Jonathan, I think one of the things that we're seeing here too is Job is lamenting the incredible extremes that his life has gone to. I mean, if we look back before God allowed the things to happen to him that they did, Job was blessed on a level not too far, Jonathan, from King Solomon. I mean, that's how blessed Job was materially. I mean, he had lots of everything. He wanted for absolutely nothing. He was the wealthiest in the land. And now, where is he? Sitting naked out in a field, scraping his sores with potsherd.
Right.
You talk about going. I mean, there could be no further extreme that he has gone to, and he is lamenting that here in these verses of chapter 29. And so, in the next verse you're going to get to, in verse 6, kind of illustrates that just a little bit. But I think that there's wisdom here for us, Jonathan, because of the fact, and you went to this a little while ago, our life is going to have extremes like that. There are going to be times and moments when we are in much. There's going to be times and moments when we are in lack. But Jonathan,
Right.
but here's the deal, and I'm done. God is God in both times. And we've got to be like Paul was, being able to learn to live well in times of plenty and learn to live well in times of need.
Amen, brother. Sister Vanessa, I want to hear from you before I go to verse 6. What do you think so far?
Okay. I've just been listening. They're saying pretty much everything. But I gotta, my take on it is that he was so close to God at one time. and he couldn't feel his presence now. He can't feel his
Right.
presence at all. So he's reminiscing about, when he was in control of everything, and that he helped people all the time. He helped the homeless, he helped the widows. But he knew that he would continue in goodness with God because he
Right.
did have that faith. He had that faith. So I know he's reminiscing, and he's, like when Eliphaz in chapter 6, I think it was. No, it was in chapter 22. About when he was calling Job the worst things he could call him. And
Right.
going against him. And Job knew that he always did good stuff. But this is the take I got on it today. And I just, I really liked it because I thought it was exactly how you feel when you're in pain and, you just want to hang on to something. And so you hang on to God, whether you're reminiscing in pain or not. Last 2 cents.
That's right, sister. And I tell you what I think, that sometimes clinging to those times where you had such spiritual plenty, what ends up happening is that when you go through dark times, just like when you look back, let me give you an example. And then I'm going to go into the next verse. If you remember Daniel's prophecy, the 70 weeks. 70 weeks was 70 times 7 sevens. 490 years. The reason why, does anybody know the reason why it was 490 years of that prophecy? Does anybody know why? Anybody?
I would just say when Artaxerxes gave the command.
No. What I'm saying, do you know why the 490 years was imposed? Do you know why that?
Yeah.
I feel like it has something to do with how long that they were in rebellion towards God, right? Israel.
It was rebellion, but for what reason? What was the nature of their rebellion? What was their
Murmuring
it
and
was rebellion, but what was the act? What was the rebellion?
was it not their complaining and murmuring and
They were wanting a king.
Idolatry?
No, it was Floyd. Sister Floyd got it here right, and Brother Old School got it right. The service of the land, the Jubilee. It was they ignored the Sabbaths, the Sabbath of the land. They ignored it, and they ignored it for 490 years. So God sent his angel Gabriel to say, we're going to get it back. Those 490 years that you did not obey me, I'm going to demand that of you. And this is another proof, okay? For those of people who have a problem with understanding Daniel's 70 weeks, remember, when the Israelites, think about this for a second. The dispensationalists will say that there's a gap between 483 years and the last 7 years. But understand something. There was no gap in their disobedience for honoring the Sabbath of the land that they were told to honor. And the Sabbath included the year of Jubilee, when they were supposed to let their servants go and let them go free. They kept their slaves, kept them enslaved and in bondage. Number one, they refused to honor the Sabbath, to let the land rest. And so God says, well, because of that, I'm going to pronounce this 70-week prophecy. It was 490 years. And guess what? That 490 years was a consecutive 490 years, not broken up by the space of over 2,000 years between 483 and the remaining 7 years, totaling 490. This was important. And so they had to go into, God required of them, he required of them the law that they had broken. And so he says to Daniel, give my people 70 weeks. And in these 70 weeks is going to be determined these series of things that we read about in chapter 9, 24 through 27. We see that. But what's happening in the case of Job, and I kind of forgot where I was going with this, but what's happening in the case of Job is that he is looking back, reflecting on what happened to him in the past, and that is what is giving him his expectation and his hope that God will resume his affiliation with him in whatever way. And I think that Job knows that. In verse 6, Job says this.
Sorry.
Job
can I
says,
ask a question about that.
no, let me go on, sister, because I'm getting way behind. Let me go on. I'll get to you in a second. I promise. So in verse 6, Job says, when I washed my steps with butter, and the rock poured me out rivers of oil, when I went out to the gate through the city, when I prepared my seat in the street. Again, Job continues his reflection. He's reminiscing, like Mariah said. He's going back, and he's recognizing that abundance and honor, which is what he's doing right now. He's recalling his abundance and the honor that he once had, and he's recalling that. And he's expressing himself by pointing out that his prosperity was, he's looking at his prosperity in the past with this rich imagery, showing a life that he had that was full of plenty. He had a lot. And at the same time, he had public respect. He's remembering that. He held a place of dignity in the society and in the community, in the city. He sat among those who had authority. And his presence was acknowledged. People didn't just walk by him and ignore him. They knew who he was. And they honored him. They honored him. And they acknowledged and they valued him in the city. So what Job is doing, he's trying to, in my mind, okay? Some of you may see these things differently, and it's hard to know what was actually in his mind. We can only go by what he is talking about and assess this in a way. But what I'm seeing is a man who is hanging on to all of those fragile, what appears to him, fragile threads that tie him to God. And he wants to remember these things. And he's reflecting on what his past was like. And look what he says in verse 8 through 10. He says, the young men, they saw me and they hid themselves. Because they reverenced him. And he says, in the age, they arose and they stood up. Job is saying that even the guys who were older than him, they would stand up and show him honor, and they would show him respect. The princes, it says, the princes refrained from talking, and they laid their hands over their mouth. And the whole idea is that they want to speak so badly and so robustly, but they have to cover their mouths out of respect so that their words won't pierce through their fingers. And then it says that the nobles, they held their peace, and their tongue cleaved to the roof of their mouth. And what this is depicting is a man who was greatly respected from all ranks of society, from the lowest to the highest. All showed respect. The young deferred, the aged honored, and those in authority gave him place. They let him go, and they showed him due reverence. Job had this. Silence in his presence was indicated as reverence. Not fear alone, but esteem for wisdom and esteem for character. Job was a man of high character and a man that was held in high esteem by all, high and low. And whatever he said carried a lot of weight. When he spoke, it carried a lot of weight. People listened, they heard him, and his presence commanded attention without requiring force. He elicited respect. When he walked, when he spoke, people stopped and made sure to hear what it was he had to say. And then he says in verse 11 through 13, he says, when the ear heard me, then it blessed me. And when the eye saw me, it gave witness to me. Because I delivered, and this is what somebody brought up earlier. He says, because I delivered the poor that cried, and the fatherless, and him that had none to help him. The blessing of him that was ready to perish came upon me, and I caused the widow's heart to sing for joy. So what is Job saying here? He's saying that the honor that he received was grounded in his works of mercy. See, Job knows what he did. He knows what his calling was. So many of us today, what does God want me to do? I don't know what God wants me to do. What am I going to do? He hasn't told me. The sky hasn't cracked open and God hasn't sent me a telegram from heaven to tell me what to do. See, Job knew what his job was and he did it. And what was his job? Works of mercy. He paid attention. He made time for people. He served. Like Brother Jeffrey, he was an encouraging servant. And he knew it. He's not being haughty and boastful. He's stating a fact. He's stating a fact. He's not questioning whether he was sincere or not. He knows he was sincere. And he recognizes that. So many Christians have no idea why they are here. And I don't understand that. I don't understand Christians who always whine and complain and moan about not knowing what the Lord would have them to do. And then when the Lord gives them something to do, they tell you about how they have no time to do it. I don't have time to do it. I'm working 10 hours. I have a child, and I have my husband, or I have my wife, and I have my job, and I have my friends, and I have soccer practice, and dance classes, and cooking classes, and the volleyball practice, and all this stuff. And then they go back to wondering why they don't know what their calling is. I'm not picking on any person. I'm not. But I'm just telling you a stark reality that is pervasive in Christian circles. And no one can tell me otherwise. Because if it were otherwise, we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in right now with a nation and a world that is full and is saturated with apostate believers, unbelieving Christians. Unbelieving Christians. Do nothing Christians. Stagnated. Backsliders. Can't move forward. Won't move forward. Everything else is so important. But Job is saying, Lord, I've done these things and I want to continue. Think about Job's mindset. He's like thinking, and I'm sure many Christians who are service-minded and who are true servants. You know, when you've been given to the poor and when you've been servicing people and when you have been obedient to God's call and when you have served with a solid ministry of aiding people and providing works of mercy, or whatever, and when that's taken away from you, you got to think, Lord, why me? I want to do these things that other people won't do. I want to, and I want to do it, and I'm sincere about wanting to serve you, Lord. Why would you remove me from this post where I'm willing to go do what all these other unbelieving Christians will not do and refuse to do, and who pretend to be humble and exercising humility, by saying, I don't know what my call is. God won't tell me what my call is. I don't know. I'm confused. But Job is saying, I know what you put me here to do. I know what I'm supposed to do as a servant. I know. Thank you, brother, for that. Job is saying, I know. Let me loose, Lord. Show me what I need to do and let me loose. And so while Christians, it's crazy because you got so many people, I don't know what my mission is. I don't know what God's calling me to do. I'm confused, but they can sit on TikTok and argue and bicker about stupid stuff all day long. And I mean stupid stuff. The same things every day over and over and over and over again when there are people in prison who need to be visited and need to hear the word of God. There are sick children in cancer wards that need somebody to come visit and spend time with them. There are people who need your help and you are saying, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. Lord, where's my calling? But you find time to argue all day long on TikTok and whatever other platform you're on. I don't understand it. I don't. And so we have so many opportunities to look into our own souls and really understand what service to the Lord is really all about. What did Christ say to those at his throne? What did he say? You didn't give me a cup of cold water when I was thirsty. You didn't feed me when I was hungry. You didn't clothe me when I was naked. He wasn't talking about, well, I have a problem with you because you didn't get the doctrine of predestination quite right. You didn't get the doctrine of man's free will or the bondage of sin. You didn't get that quite right. He didn't go into all these things, not in the scriptures. Now, I'm not saying that those things aren't done or needed. But what he focused on was service, ministry, exhortation, edification. I know that this is quite boring to a lot of people to do. I know that it is glamorous to engage in these foolish arguments and contentions. It's glamorous. It's so cool to cook somebody and to show them